So, no, I wouldn't say I have a passion for HR.
Welcome back to Human Resources for the People. It's a human capital
Today we're going to be talking
revolution.
about hiring someone in the Netherlands. This is part of my long series on human resources, comparative human resources, politics, and employment laws across the world. If you want to check out some interesting ones, I have a great one on Burma and another one on Iran. Links down below if you're interested, because I think that it's really interesting to understand what's going on in the rest of the world and what we can compare America to. We'll start right off with background checks. There can be done, they can be done in the Netherlands if we're hiring someone, but they're subject to data protection regulation, and that's ultimately what you see in most of these countries is that data protection regulation, either from the EU or inside the company or inside the country. uh, they govern background checks. So, if there are certain functions, an applicant can request a certificate of good behavior from the Ministry for Security and Justice. I've seen that quite a bit as a background check. And that is fairly common throughout the rest of the world, not common in the United States at all. I don't know if you could do that from any ministry to get a certificate of good behavior or anything like that. Uh, there has to be a medical exam, or there can be medical exams, but only for jobs in which the applicant has to meet standards. And those standards are, specifically related to the job. That's a best practice in the United States, but it is not. It is not necessarily the law. It's just the best practice. And the job advertisement has to mention that there's a medical exam, which, frankly, that is completely different than the United States. The job advertisement absolutely does not have to mention the need for medical exam, but is only a good idea when it is reflective of the job itself. Drug testing drug and alcohol testing are prohibited, except on a statutory basis. So there are positions inside the Netherlands that are required to be drug tested, and for those you can drug test, but otherwise you cannot. In the United States, you can, and there are, of course, positions that require to be drug tested. Of course, in the Netherlands, discrimination is prohibited in the Netherlands. There's an interesting act that came out at the beginning of last year for the Act on More Balance Between Men and Women in Boards and Supervisory Boards. And that puts into place a quota that Dutch market listed companies have to have at least 1/3 women and 1/3 men. So there is a quota in place for women and men in the workplace in the Netherlands. In addition, large companies have to put in place a ambitious and appropriate target figures to create balance on the boards. So they actually have to have a plan and a process in place in order to achieve that. That is that is actually in California. There's a similar law with respect to uh, makeup of the board, gender makeup of the board, but federally that is not required. There has to be a written contract in place, and it's actually kind of impressive in that it has a lot of requirements. Most countries might have 4 or 5 requirements in a written contract, and they're pretty simple. But there's a whole long list in the Netherlands. The ones that I think are fairly unique is whether or not the employee takes part in a pension arrangement, whether the employee contract concerns temporary agency employment or payrolling, and then whether or not it's an on-call contract, and the right to training, if applicable. So that is a significant amount. Of course, in the United States, there is no requirement for contracts whatsoever. That isn't a requirement on the business. Requirements, for the most part, don't exist in the United States, but it is fairly interesting when you compare this to even other countries where requirements are part and parcel of the work environment. We don't typically see such a long list. Link down below if you want to check out the whole list. I've included it. I don't think it's something that I want to cover in this video in great detail. The next one up is probationary period permitted by law. If there's a 1 month one for fixed term contracts longer than 6 months, so you can have people on 1 month probationary period. However, if it's for an indefinite term contract or a contract longer than 2 years, you can have them on 2 months. That's kind of tied with what we've seen generally speaking with respect to probationary periods. In terms of shortest, I've seen 1 month. I've seen none, but then I've seen as long as 6 months in other countries. The interesting thing that you can glean from information about the laws governing recruitment agencies is that quite frequently companies' collective labor agreements include temporary agencies. And there's a collective labor agreement for temporary agency workers that, of course, doesn't exist in the United States, but frankly, many reasons that companies use temporary workers is to get around labor agreements or to, short circuit them in many different ways, and that is clearly not allowed in the Netherlands. And of course, this article is from Lexology, which is a great resource, and it's from the employment law firm Littler. Let me know what you think about it in the comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye, guys.